to a growing concern. I've noticed, in the last few years that everybody's saying that America is going down the tubes, and it seems like on the people from the right are saying that well, first of all, it's not America; it's the United States. But the people on the far right say that it's the government's fault, and the people on the left say it's the government's fault. And as my guest tonight, Paul Cienfuegos, is going to talk about, and I have said in the past, that it's the same thing. In fact, we got Mussolini to thank for giving us the word fascism.
That's right.
And that's what it is.
The merger of corporations and state.
Mm-hmm. And it's probably no different than it's been in the past. They weren't corporations, but they were the moneyed class, and it's the same situation. But anyway, welcome to the program, Paul. Paul was on, many, I don't know, maybe a year ago, a year and a half ago.
2 or 3.
Has it been that long? Oh,
Yeah.
Time flies when you're in front of the camera.
Yeah.
So, but Paul is, he took my notes. Anyway, Paul's involved with getting out there and speaking about how we can not be victims of the regulatory system and take control of our democracy. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, not just the regulatory system, but basically citizens feeling like they don't have authority over government. Government's supposed to serve us constitutionally.
Of, for, and by the people.
And it's right in every state constitution. I'll just start with a paragraph from our state constitution. It's the very first paragraph, Bill of Rights. Natural rights inherent in people. We declare that all power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. Here's the key part. And they have at all times a right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper. So whenever government is not serving us, whenever there's not consent of the governed, we the people have the right, the inherent right of self-government, the right to alter, reform, or abolish the government.
Mm-hmm. You know, that kind of
we do.
That was a slippery slope, because wouldn't those folks that did the Malheur thing last January say, well, that's what they were doing?
Yeah, they sure picked a strange county. They didn't do their homework right, because they could have gone to a county where the public supported them.
Right.
Those exist, but they didn't pick the right one.
So I mean, in abstract or in the broad picture, they had a right to do that. They just didn't go about it the right way.
Well, a county has enormous political authority by majority, but again, they were kind of more the rugged individualist approach, which is not what we're doing. I'm a leader in the community rights movement, which is about community majorities. What do community majorities want? Yeah.
And I think the first thing to do about that is they have to realize that they have the power to do that, like you said.
They have the inherent right of self-government. It comes out of the American Revolution. Every state constitution that came out of the American Revolution had paragraphs that described in great detail the inherent right of local self-government. Can I read you one of those paragraphs?
I wish you would, right? Because it's
well?
good to have this documented, because I know this goes back to like the Magna Carta in, 1500 or something like that.
I mean, this is what we fought a revolution for. We didn't fight a revolution so that we could become another empire like Britain. We fought a revolution for real liberty. So here's a paragraph from the Pennsylvania Constitution, immediately following the American Revolution. This was tossed out in an in a corporate coup, basically. Not a corporate coup, but an elite coup, 10 or 15 years after it was placed in the Pennsylvania Constitution.
So you're talking about it was around 1800 then.
Right after the American Revolution. That government is or ought to be instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people, nation, or community, and not for the particular emolument or advantage of any single man, family, or set of men who are only part of that community, and that the community has an indubitable, unalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish government in such manner as shall be by that community judged most conducive to the common good.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of language existed in all of our early revolutionary state constitutions. But the elite very quickly wanted to consolidate their power after the revolution. So that language is stripped all over the country fairly quickly.
But it's in the original Constitution for the country.
It's in our original Constitution.
Forget the terminology.
It's in the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm. It's in there that we have a right to
self-government.
And it seems to me that on the surface that's what we have. But when you start
Well,
looking at the nuts and bolts of it, we don't.
I don't know if it appears on the. I mean, most Americans wouldn't say that they have any right of self-government. Right?
Well, I
Most
mean, the
Americans
idea that
would
we
say,
elect and, that whole thing.
Oh, sure.
It looks like it.
Right, but most Americans
feel
would
like
say that the choices we have for candidates suck.
Exactly right.
Right. So it doesn't really matter what your political perspective is. Most of us now think that we have very little control over our government or our businesses.
Mm-hmm. Well, the elites have always controlled, and it just seems like people take it for as long as they can, and then there's the Bastille, or something happens where that particular thing is overthrown. But revolution, it always seems to come back around, or where we need to do it again.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are saying that we're in that position right now. But like I was saying at the beginning of the show, the left and the right have a different concept of who the oppressor is.
Well, different, but really almost identical. I mean, corporations run the government. The left is concerned about corporations. The right is concerned about big government.
Mm-hmm.
But if corporations now control big government, what's the difference?
That's why
we're really on the same page. We just don't realize it.
And a lot of people think that like the money that is given to the candidates and all that is the way to start. Like next week's guest, Dan Meek, is going to talk about an Oregon initiative that's going to try to grab a hold of that and deal with it on the constitutional level of Oregon, and hopefully it does that. And that in a lot of people's mind is money in government is what's spoiling the whole thing.
Right, and primarily corporate money in government, because virtually all of it is corporate.
Well,
so even if we could just split apart in our understanding people's right to give money to politicians and corporations' right to give money to politicians, even if we could get that differentiation solid in most Americans' minds, would be a huge way along, because virtually all the money in politics is corporate.
Well, isn't there a limit on what individuals can give, but there's not on corporations?
There's a limit of hundreds of thousands of dollars that what people can now give. There's an obscure right to the $1 digit. It's I have no idea how they came up with that, but it all starts in 1976 in a Supreme Court case, Buckley versus Vallejo, that I'm sure Dan Meek will talk about as well next week, where the Supreme Court decides that you're not allowed to limit how much money a person can donate to influence a political campaign, because that would violate the person's right to speak.
Free speech.
So it's the money equals speech decision of the U.S. Supreme Court, and corporations had been persons already for a long time, and they'd won, since 1886, but they'd won First Amendment free speech rights in 1930 or something like that. So, when you say no limits on person donations to candidates, and corporations are persons. So 1976, the floodgates opened to corporate money in elections.
They also have managed to get privacy rights too.
They have corporate privacy rights. They have corporate religious freedoms. They have corporate right to a jury trial. They have corporate commerce clause and contracts clause rights, which are a little more obscure to explain. What else? They have all sorts of intangible property rights, which most people don't understand.
Proprietary rights.
Intangible property is ideas, so trademarks, copyrights, inventions, patents, all that stuff. When a corporation has intangible property rights, it means that the boards of directors have decision-making authority over what gets produced, how it gets produced, how the profits are invested back in the company or given back to the public or put in the CEO's pocket. All of that becomes corporate intangible property rights, decision-making that affects everybody. Basically, virtually all economic decision-making now is not made by people we elect. It's made by corporate boards of directors, and we're not allowed to have any participation because it's an intangible property right of a corporate person, these decisions.
Well, that kind of reminds me of, I see sometimes on Facebook what a great job and how graceful Obama and his wife are and all that and all the good things that they do. But what you're talking about right there is he's pushed that ball much further down the road, seems like to me, as far as...
he's been a disaster in terms of, both corporatism and the military-industrial complex, which again is corporate playing field, right? If war was not profitable, right? If corporations weren't profiting from war in the United States, I don't think we would have endless wars.
So I guess we should make war a non-profit.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
That would be a step in the
Right?
right direction. Well, what made me think of that is this whole push into the TPP. That really shows his true colors.
It really does.
Because
Yeah.
he's making it a law
Yeah.
to do everything that you talked about.
Right. So he's taking it. It's already under the previous World Trade Organization and all of the other previous global trade treaties, corporate trade treaties. It becomes illegal for the U.S. federal government to do environmental protection and other kinds of protections because it violates foreign corporations' rights here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But then you take the Trans-Pacific Partnership and it goes one more layer, and now corporations have their rights violated when a state or a local government in the United States tries to pass a law. That then becomes illegal under the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
And that means they
as
got
well.
all the corporations will have all them lawyers to go after a state or a city.
Right.
And then that does not work out.
No.
Because they've corporations have taken like countries in like South America over mining, and they'll have
Right.
1,000 lawyers and they'll have 3.
Right.
And there's no way they can win.
They tried to corporate privatize Bolivia's water. I don't know if you remember this decades ago. It became the water infrastructure of Bolivia was sold to a multinational corporation nationwide, and the company then got the law changed so that you couldn't legally collect rainwater off your roof. That was a violation of that corporation's rights. And the public thought that was an outrage, and there was mass uprisings against it. And they managed to throw the corporation out and to decorporatize the water system. But the corporation still went to the Global Trade Tribunal of the WTO and forced Bolivia to pay loss of future profits, even though they were thrown out of Bolivia a long time ago.
I would think that they could just get out of the NAFTA agreement or TPP agreement or whatever, but I guess it doesn't work that way.
It's challenging. I think what Americans really need to understand is that corporations are not these Goliaths that we're trying to challenge with our tiny little bows and arrows. Corporations are actually houses of cards. That's what Americans don't understand. Most activists don't understand this. I mean, here's an example. So here's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Rights, the Articles of Incorporation of Monsanto, okay? This is
ugliest
as close,
corporation in the country.
Yeah,
in the
ugliest,
world.
and interesting. So ugliest is personifying an it, right? So here's the reality, is that we treat Monsanto and Exxon and BP and all these other horrid corporations as if they're these Goliaths with enormous political power that we can barely manage to challenge at all, right? We go after one corporate harm at a time. But imagine if we started to understand that corporations are simply legal business structures that don't exist in the material world.
They're
Because that's
fictions.
actually what they are. They're legal fictions. You can't take a picture of Monsanto. This is as close as you can get.
They're articles
Right?
of
This is the
incorporation.
Articles of Incorporation. This is the defining document of Monsanto Corporation, right? You can take a picture of its headquarters and its directors, but you can't take a picture of the Monsanto Corporation because it's just a mind-made business structure. Well, anything that's mind-made can be mind-unmade, right? And so what even American activists who are battling one corporate harm at a time don't understand is that we have authority over things that don't exist in the material world. And so when we allow corporations to have First Amendment free speech rights and property rights and religious freedom and all this other crazy stuff, it's like saying we're giving free speech rights to the number 6. It's just as crazy, right? The number 6 is a mind-made concept. It doesn't exist in the real world, right? It comes out of our heads, right? It's no different. So if we think it's crazy to give free speech to the number 6, how do we get the American public to start understanding it's crazy to allow corporations to have free speech rights? There's really no difference at all. It's a mind-made structure of law.
Well, it follows the trail of giving money free speech.
Absolutely. Do we give money free speech? How do we do that?
Well, don't we do that by letting them give money to...
Corporations are property. It's more like giving property free speech.
All right.
Yeah.
try to get an idea of those.
So, and
those
that's
terms there.
why the community rights movement is such a powerful concept to me, and why I do this work full time. Because if you start to understand that rights for legal fictions are not inevitable, and if you start to understand that we the people are sovereign and have authority to change the laws, and it's the laws that make corporations powerful, right? Corporations are state creations. They don't exist independent from the state of Oregon, right? States charter corporations.
And most of them are in like New Jersey.
And most are in New Jersey and Delaware, right? And they need legal documents that states approve simply to exist, right? Corporations are still creations of the state. People don't understand
That's their Achilles heel.
Corporations are they are chartered. Their charters can be revoked. Their charters can be rewritten so that they're required to serve a public good and cause no harm, which was actually the language of the early corporate charters after the American Revolution, all the way into the late 1800s. So when we go after one corporate harm at a time, which is what virtually all activism is these days, begging government agencies to stop one specific corporate harm or to stop a permit being allowed for a corporate application, it's a complete diversion. We have to understand we have the legal authority, as we the people, to pass laws that require that corporations serve us and that resubordinate corporations below us. That's all in our power now.
To bring up an example, was it Tesoro, or there's some local, you know what that
Oil
is?
company?
The oil companies and the things that are, the groups that are trying to bring oil, coal, and all that through. Folks are going to stop them, you know, through public testimonies and such at these public, you know, meetings and all. You wouldn't say that they shouldn't be doing that, but you're saying that they can be doing more.
What I would be saying is that the purpose of Tesoro Oil Corporation should be defined through a public process. That's what I'm saying. That we need defining authority over all of our business institutions. And that may sound crazy to people who are listening, but that's actually our history. Right? That's the beginning of post-American Revolution, is every business corporation was defined by a state legislature, full of requirements and prohibitions written right into their charter, which we now call their Articles of Incorporation. So do we want Tesoro banned from exporting oil or coal to China? Then we put it in their charter, right? We have authority to define these corporations. So when instead we pack public hearings and beg unelected and unaccountable regulatory agency directors to protect us, that's a diversion from our real political power. That's what I'm saying.
Right. So shouldn't both be going on at the same time?
Well, as long as the activist community in this country doesn't understand where our power lies, it's better that we pack regulatory hearings than do nothing. Absolutely. But why should we be begging an unelected and unaccountable director of an agency to decide whether an export terminal gets built or not? That violates our inherent rights of self-government.
So while folks are going to these meetings, and as you know, I agree they need to be going to these meetings and telling these local officials what they don't want this to happen, what tact would you be taking?
Well,
I mean, how would you go about?
If we were radicalizing the public, and I don't just mean lefties, I mean the public, right, across the political spectrum, so that they understood that's our authority that's being violated by directors of agencies, we'd be shutting down the regulatory hearings. We wouldn't be pleading with regulatory agency directors. Through civil disobedience, we'd be shutting the hearings down as a violation of our authority. Right? Because they've been given authority illegitimately by these structures of laws.
And then how would we exert that authority?
How would we shut a hearing down?
Yeah, after it's shut down.
We did that. Well, we wouldn't be doing even that until we were politically more savvy as the people of Oregon or Washington or Multnomah County or whatever whatever the boundaries, the scale that you're looking at. But the people of Multnomah County would say, we're going to pass laws that forbid fossil fuel terminals from being built in our county, as the Portland City Council claimed to do last year, and then it appears ignored what they'd already put in policy just in the last few weeks and had to be reminded that they put this in policy. policy is not good enough. We need enforceable laws. And ideally, we need enforceable laws that the public can directly enforce. And in community rights ordinance making, we build direct local public enforcement right into our ordinances. And I don't know, it's been a bunch of years since I was here, but we're now up to 200 communities in 9 states that have passed ordinances. Most of them have never been legally challenged. 95% of 200 communities' laws have not been challenged. So, and every one of these ordinances, these community rights ordinances, bans a particular harmful corporate activity, like fracking or big box stores or whatever.
Or the Vermont's genetically engineered labels.
Well, we wouldn't demand labels. We would demand no GMO food. We don't do regulation in our movement, right? To label a dangerous food is again to concede authority. Why would we label dangerous food? Why wouldn't we just say
Stop
prohibit
doing it.
dangerous food?
Okay.
Right? Again, this is colonized mind stuff from
Sure.
from our movement's perspective. That when you're demanding a lower parts per million of poison in your food, or lower parts per million of radiation in the air and water, that's the colonized mind speaking, right? We don't want poison in our air, water, food, right? So we would prohibit it, and these 200 communities in 9 states have banned a certain each one bans a certain corporate activity that they consider harmful. They don't want it. Enshrines an inherent right of local self-government in that community, and strips that sector of corporations of all their constitutional rights. That's what a sovereign people would do at the local level. They would say, we're going to define what corporations are and what they're allowed to do and not do in our city or town or county, ultimately as we build this movement in our state and in our federal scale. And we're working at all of those levels already. We already have 6 state community rights networks in place. They've started to meet as a federal community rights network. And the most exciting state community rights activism that's going on is in Colorado, where a number of years ago, a couple communities banned fracking in local ordinances.
They did that in Texas recently too, one city.
They did, but they didn't pass our ordinances, which are a lot more challenging to legally sue. They were sued by energy companies. These 2 ordinances were challenged. And instead of just being reactive and trying to defend the ordinances, they launched a state constitutional amendment campaign, which is currently in the works. They're currently collecting 100,000 signatures in Colorado.
That should be easy.
To get it on the ballot, to amend the state constitution through the ballot box, to make it illegal for corporations to sue local communities that are banning harmful corporate activities.
So a state constitution can do
amendment.
that.
Yeah.
Could they appeal to the federal?
They sure could. But now you've got a majority of people who've already passed. I mean, it hasn't happened yet, but if it did, and it may take 2 or 3 cycles to get this thing passed, because can you imagine the amount of corporate money that's going to be thrown into the state of Colorado when this vote comes up in another year or 2, once they get the signatures and they're ready? The corporate money from all over the U.S. that's going to be thrown to try to stop an ordinance, an amendment that says corporations no longer have constitutional rights in the state of Colorado.
They don't want that
They
ball
only
to
have
get
the
rolling.
privileges granted to them in their charters. And they can no longer sue local governments trying to protect the health and welfare of their communities, which is what they now do all the time.
And they don't want that ball to
And
get
they don't
rolling.
want that because, and see, what we're doing is we're exercising our inherent self-governing authority. We're not begging anybody, if you notice. We're not begging any government leaders or corporate leaders.
I think that you're really making it, really breaking this apart and demonstrating the distinction. And I understand the distinction, but then it kind of goes away, and it all kind of gets cloudy
Because
again.
all the activism in this city and county and state are conventional one corporate harm at a time activism. We have to build a big conversation where people start to shift gears into a new kind of activism where we're exercising our power over corporations,
Sure.
not pleading with government or corporate leaders to cause less harm.
There was some conferences going on a few years ago, a couple, 3 years in a row, and corporate dominance.
Yes.
Where they were becoming aware that you don't fight this timber sale and that timber sale and this timber sale, or you don't put these fires out one at a time. You may or may not be successful, but you need to go to the beginning of it, and that particular, say, industry would be those particular, whatever you call it.
We could be banning clear-cut logging county by county now in Oregon.
They
And
tried
the
to do it
fact that
statewide here before you moved up here.
I went to, that's actually how I first got to be known. My work in Portland is I used to go to those End Corporate Dominance conferences. I came up from Humboldt County where I used to live. I went to every one.
Those were
and
great
I gave
conferences.
talks and workshops at them. They were fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I remember taping you at a church one time up here.
I gave a keynote speech at a
I
church
think it was
years
a
before I
Methodist
moved
over
here.
there. Yeah, I remember that. You know what we're talking about here. You mentioned it, that it's getting back to the early days, because I remember the corporations. One corporation could not own another. Their charter lasted for 5 years. There was a bunch of rules. I think
right.
Jefferson had a lot to do with that, and I could be wrong on that, but it seems to me that's what was going on. And little by little, in fact, from what I understand from forget the fellow's name now, but he come up with it was a something versus railroad. And that decision said that corporations are people, but it didn't say that in the decision.
Right, you're talking about Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad
Right.
Company,
That
1886.
That decision was not made
right.
that way.
And yet it became the precedent-setting decision on
Right.
corporate
And even though it
personhood,
wasn't there.
even though it wasn't there.
That's a hard one to believe.
Yeah,
Tom Hartman.
Tom Hartman has written
yeah.
a story, a book on equal protection about it.
Right, and that's incredible that
Yeah.
somebody could, the short notes or whatever that were ahead of the decision could say the decision said this, and it didn't, and that lie became law.
And it was the court clerk who wrote this before the court case was
an
even heard,
employee.
and the court clerk had been a railroad attorney.
Yeah.
And a majority of the justices at the time had been railroad attorneys. So this had been planned for years. They had been working on a corporate personhood win for 20 or 30 years when they finally got it in that case. This wasn't a one-off thing.
No, that was very well planned.
I mean, same with, we now take it for granted that corporations fund all of our nonprofit organizations, right? Our jazz festivals and our Boy Scouts and our church camps and all of this stuff are all, I mean, how could we do the blues festival without Safeway, supposedly, right?
Yeah, or PGE, or
It's
ballparks,
just,
or
right?
whatever.
It used to be a felony in the early charters for a corporation to donate to a civic or charitable organization.
I didn't know
Directors went
that.
to prison. It was a felony. Right now we're culturally dependent, financially dependent on corporate generosity, right? So corporations don't pay their fair share of taxes anymore. So they have all of this profit, and with it they make public policy by deciding which institutions, nonprofits can survive and which can't,
Right.
through their generous donations. We
Yeah.
need to ban corporate money in our nonprofit sector.
And which legislators they're going to buy.
Exactly.
You know, so a lot of what you were saying reminds me of as far as you got a certain number of cities or certain number of states that are passing these, making this work.
200
Reminds me of the
communities.
movement for Citizens United, where people are
Yeah.
doing the same thing, little here, little there, across the country to stop that.
They're also focusing at the local level and getting city councils and local ballot initiatives to pass something. But the problem is they're passing resolutions. We're passing law.
Aha, I see.
Right? Move to Amend gets local governments and local ballot initiatives to pass non-binding resolutions. They have no authority under law. So you're not building political power. You're building consciousness in a significant way, absolutely. But you're not building political power over our systems of law, public power, right?
And that's
That's my problem with
it-
Move to Amend. I mean,
that-
it's brilliant in many ways, and the historical material on their website is terrific. But we're passing. Their goal is resolutions at the local level, then resolutions at the state level, to all requesting that the federal government amend the federal constitution to say money is not speech and corporations are not people, right? So what is that going to take? 10 years, 20 years to get the federal government?
It's already been 5 or so.
It's been, yeah, it probably has,
Yeah.
right? I don't see the federal government moving towards a majority of federal legislators in the House and Senate. I don't see it. I don't see any political power built. See, that's the problem. We have 200 communities that have passed laws that we can directly enforce. We've stripped corporations of all of their constitutional rights in 200 communities, and we can locally enforce that already. This is not a resolution. We're making law. And in fact, it goes even further. In Grant, can I tell you a story about the most exciting thing in our movement?
Sure.
So Grant Township, Pennsylvania is a tiny little community in rural Pennsylvania. It's a conservative community. And in fact, most of these 200 communities that have passed our laws are rural conservative communities. This is not a left-wing movement.
Right, that's what I was going to ask.
It's not. Now, these are not Tea Party conservatives. These are more kind of traditional conservatives,
like Eisenhower, or
who are very land-based and care about the sacredness of their land, the control of their land, keeping it safe. So in Grant Township, Pennsylvania, a handful of years ago. This will take me a couple minutes. Is that okay to tell you this?
Sure. This is
probably
this is kind of how it all. This
okay.
is a microcosm of what's going on.
I mean, this is a story that kind of can relate to the whole larger movement in one little story. So a handful of years ago in this rural conservative community, Grant Township, Pennsylvania, a company called, I always forget the name, Pennsylvania General Energy Company, which is probably as big as RPGE. It's probably a big utility company. They decided that they wanted to start digging holes in the ground in their township for fracking wastewater from fracking. They didn't want to frack Grant Township. They wanted to pour wastewater from fracking into the township.
Like in California, they're using it to water crops.
God, I hope that's not true.
Well, that's
fracking water is being used to water crops?
What I'm seeing on Facebook.
That's really scary.
Yeah.
That's really scary. I didn't know that. So the township passes a community rights ordinance that bans the dumping of fracking wastewater anywhere in the township. Okay, now it's banned.
So
the corporation quickly sues the township, saying, "Oh yeah," they say to the judge, "Well, you're just a little dinky second class township. It's called. You don't have home rule authority. You don't have the authority to ban a corporate activity." The township then, and I should say that the original ordinance places the river that's going to be, the river in the watershed, the Little Mahoning River, is the river that's going to be permanently poisoned with this. The Grant Township original ordinance places the Little Mahoning River right in the law and says that it has the right to thrive and evolve. It has a right of nature, right? It gives it constitutional protection.
Excellent. Yeah,
okay.
I like that.
So they're sued. Their response to the lawsuit is, we're going to become a first-class township. We're going to pass a home rule charter. It's the first ever community rights-based home rule charter ever passed in the United States. A home rule charter is like a constitution for a local community. Portland is, I forget, it's either Portland or Multnomah County is home rule. I always forget which it is, one or the other. And lots of communities have home rule charters. So their new home rule charter takes the ordinance they originally put and puts it right in their home rule charter, once again banning the dumping of wastewater from fracking in the township, adds a whole new layer that says we're going to now legalize civil disobedience as a public enforcement tool to stop this corporation from dumping poisons in our township. Mm-hmm. So for the first time in U.S. history, civil disobedience is placed into local law as a legal enforcement mechanism. Now, we think of civil disobedience as something that you're going to get arrested doing. They're placing into law in their township the authorization to use civil disobedience to enforce the ban on the debt as a legal method.
Yeah.
Okay? It's very interesting.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
That is groundbreaking.
It
so
is.
Did they do it that way? So you can't dump the wastewater here in order to stop the fracking?
The fracking wasn't happening in their township. It was just the wastewater
Oh,
dumping.
okay.
Yeah,
so,
so here's...
stopping fracking itself is a different story then.
It is. But you got to dump it somewhere. So if lots
Right.
of towns say not here, so here's one sentence about what they did. The people of Grant Township spoke loud and clear. They have rights. They'll protect those rights, and nobody, not a corporation, not the state government, and not a federal judge, has the authority to tell them that they have to accept toxic frack waste in their community. Right? They didn't plead with the courts. They didn't plead with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
Right? They said banned. Not only banned, but we're not going to depend on our local government to enforce it. We're going to directly enforce it through our own bodies if necessary.
So they must have taken that to court then. So wouldn't it be in the courts?
At some point, the company is going to have to re-sue. I don't believe it's happened yet, but it certainly will happen, where they're going to sue against the new Home Rule Charter.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, the thing is, in our movement, and this is another place that conventional activism drives me crazy, is that when you get sued and the judge says, "I'm sorry, you peon citizens, you have no authority to stop the corporation from exporting oil or dumping whatever, or sending coal trains down the gorge,
Cutting the forest.
cutting the forest,
Yeah.
putting a big box store in the middle of a neighborhood." When they do that, the public in conventional activism, which is virtually all American activism, we sit on our hands and we go, "We lost." And it's over.
Mm-hmm.
But hold on a second, we have self-governing authority. Government serves us. Government is subordinate to us. So these 200 communities in 9 states are beginning to understand that just because a judge says no doesn't mean that that's the final answer, because the judge is part of a subordinate legal system that's required to serve we the people. Mm-hmm. And when the people have overwhelmingly voted, as they did for this Home Rule Charter, they voted like 66 or 68% to pass this radical community rights Home Rule Charter. So at that point, when the judge says no, so what? That's when the enforcement mechanism kicks in of civil disobedience. In other words, we're doing the same thing the American revolutionaries did, right,
Boston
in the
Tea
late
Party.
1770s,
Yeah.
right? There's in 1760s and 70s. I don't know if you know this, but before the American Revolution, local communities pleaded with the king to give them more authority, to help them cause less harm in their communities.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like the regulatory system,
Seems like it.
right? And the king just said, "To hell with you." And so ultimately the public got it, the early colonists got it in these 13 colonies that were all controlled by the crown. They said, "Wait a minute, we're going to exercise our inherent authority of self-governance here." And so 90 communities wrote declarations of independence, saying we're no longer going to abide by a system of law that ignores our wishes and needs, right? 90 declarations of independence were written. Thomas Jefferson takes these 90 declarations of independence and he writes the Declaration of Independence. And then communities, starting in rural Massachusetts and spreading across the landscape, they start writing laws that secede from this structure of unjust law. And that's what the community rights movement is doing. In a way, it's the second phase of an American Revolution, right? Because now we're back to all these structures of law, be they government or corporate, that are not legitimate because we're not offering our consent, right? They're violating the majority's desires over and over. I mean, the majority doesn't want clear-cut logging, doesn't want GMO, and we're up to like 90% opposition to GMO agriculture in the United States. Doesn't matter.
And around the world.
Doesn't matter. It's a violation against corporate constitutional rights. So it will go through. Obama in the next few days will sign the Dark Act and will overrule Vermont's legislature. This will happen in the next few days. It's almost a certainty because he's a pro-GMO guy.
Unfortunately.
And the weird thing is, what's stopping the Vermont legislature and the Vermont governor and the Vermont attorney general from basically throwing the finger back at the federal government and saying, "Excuse me, but our public passed this law, and we, the legislators of Vermont, are here to serve the public. and they're overwhelmingly in support of GMO labeling. So regardless of whether you tell us it's preempted or not, we're moving forward.
I hope they do that.
They are not going to.
Oh, they're not.
No. No, we're all colonized. That's the colonized mind.
That was going to be my next point. It's like the 1760s or 70s. We were a colony, but we didn't have 200 years of a colonized mind.
That's right.
Whereas we have that now.
Right. That's right.
And and they didn't have TV. They didn't have to me, so much of this, what we talk about and what we talk about every week on this show, is because the corporate media is not only not doing their job, but they're doing the opposite. They're actually working to tamp down people's...
Because, again, we the people have allowed giant corporations to run our media, to own our media. Why are we allowing that? This is all up to us. Why are we acting so powerless when we have authority under law to control and redefine our media institutions? They're our media institutions.
Well, they're even given 5-year charters, I think, in order to...
Yeah, they're licensed.
And they don't do what
they're
their charter
licensed.
tells them
That's
they
right, and they have to come up for relicensing.
Yep.
And who relicenses? An unaccountable regulatory agency.
Not even elected.
The Federal Communications Commission.
Right, and they're appointed.
They're appointed as well. They're not accountable to we the people, right? They're illegitimate. The whole system of law is designed to exclude we the people from any kind of reasonable governing authority. It's designed that way. It's always been that way. Let me read to you. This is the Declaration of Independence, and these early charters created a local, four major principles of law in local self-government. First, that certain rights, those of life, liberty, safety, and the pursuit of happiness, are natural rights held by virtue of being human. In other words, they're not granted to us on a piece of paper called the Oregon State Constitution. They're natural rights inherent by virtue of being human. Two, that governments are created to serve to secure those rights. That's the only legitimate purpose of government, is to secure rights, not to take rights away or to give rights to corporations and take them from us.
Not to establish which rights are yours and which aren't.
Right. Three, that each government owes its existence to and derives its power exclusively from the community that creates it. I'm going to read that again.
Please.
This is so powerful, that each government owes its existence to and derives its power exclusively from the community that creates it. We create the Oregon state government. It derives its authority from us. We don't understand that. So instead we plead with our governor. We plead with our legislators and our regulatory bodies. And finally, four, that when government becomes destructive of the people's natural rights, the people have a right and duty to alter or abolish the government and establish new forms. This is our authority. This is our inherent authority. And we, the people, are now so colonized that virtually nobody in the country is doing the kind of activism based on these truths, these deep truths that come right out of the American Revolution. And it's scary because we're in a crisis. We're in an ecological, social, economic crisis, and we're not exercising the power that we have mostly.
Right. And these rights that you mentioned, I would include shelter and food in that.
Exactly. We could build that into our laws, our local law system, or our state law system.
Because it's crisis in a lot of cities, especially.
That's right.
It's a crisis here. People should not starve. Like I've said on this show many
Yeah.
times, what we call Stone Age primitive cultures, they didn't let their people
That's
starve.
right.
They didn't walk around with a beggar's bowl.
Yeah.
It's only civilized countries that do that.
Well, and you notice kind of in classic capitalist countries, the rights are all individual, and in classic communist countries, the rights are all collective. So in Russia, there is the right to work. There is the right to housing. There is the various right to not starve, right? Nobody was homeless and starving in the Soviet Union when it was still a communist system.
They might have had to
It's a
stand in
catastrophe
line for a long
now.
time.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it was a great system, but I'm saying that collective rights, societal rights, were guaranteed under a Russian, or a Chinese communist type system. In capitalism, it's all the individual rights. I don't understand why we can't have all of those, right? I want to create a system of law that all of those rights both individual and collective, are established and protected.
Mm-hmm. I've often said on the show that, about colonization, if a government or a society or a culture controls the food and the land, they got you controlled. And you with Monsanto and all these, Tyson and all these, they basically control our food. And we don't, even though it's public land, we have to go before judges and say, please don't cut this timber.
Well, we don't have to.
Well,
that's
I'm saying
that's
what that is what the
that's
perception
what we think.
is. That's what the perception is.
Yeah.
And there's a fellow that came on a show last night, a native fellow, Monty Heron, who is going to be just graduated PSU, and he's going to be teaching some classes on decolonization. And of course, when people think of that, they think of Native American or Latinos, but they don't think that we're colonized too.
We are the most colonized, propagandized people in the history of the world. White people in the United States.
In the United States.
Absolutely.
Like that picture of the Republican convention last night. It was just a sea of white people.
A sea of white people. 13 black people, I understand. Total.
Really?
13 black delegates were in that hall. That was it. Yeah.
That is...
There's a terrific, I just watched it a few hours ago, terrific Colbert segment that you can find on YouTube.
Is that the one where he jumped up there on
interviewing,
stage? Oh, different one.
He's interviewing the only, it's satire, of course, he's interviewing the only black delegate at the Republican National Convention. And the guy's an actor, it's not even a real delegate. But it's hysterically funny.
I haven't seen that one. I seen him where he jumped up on the stage there.
With his blue hair.
With his blue hair,
Yes.
that was great. That was great. We could go on all night. 12 minutes left of the show, but I've got a couple of notes here we could continue, but maybe we should just put up the phone and folks, because, this is something that I wrap my head around when I read about it or I talk to Paul who clarifies things very good for me, but it gets fuzzy afterwards because probably part of the colonized mind.
That's what it is.
And
you go back to the activism that you're familiar with in town, which I think is colonized activism, where we're begging elected officials.
Well, basically what we're saying is bigger cages and longer chains.
Yes.
It's just how I put that.
Yeah, and so, here in Portland, for folks who are listening, we're trying to create a neighborhood Bill of Rights ballot initiative as a community rights ordinance.
For Portland.
For Portland. We want to pass a law sometime in the next 2 to 4 years through the ballot box in the city of Portland that grants neighborhood majorities the authority to define the future of their neighborhood.
So like in neighborhood associations, you mean?
Well, if they're run democratically, but most neighborhood associations basically have 5 people who come to the meetings and decide for the entire neighborhood. So this would empower everybody who lives in the neighborhood to become active, because it would require neighborhood majorities. So you could ban a corporate big box store, or you could ban oil trains through your neighborhood if within your neighborhood there's a train track.
Well, they have stopped a few Walmarts through the regular channels that you...
They have, but they haven't actually. In other words, you can't, under conventional lawmaking, ban a Walmart in the United States. What they do is they make it such a pain in the ass that the Walmart directors go, well, let's go to the next town instead. But that's because of a voluntary decision by Walmart. If Walmart sues the town, they win.
That's an important distinction.
Because corporations have property rights in that town. I want to read to you the first crack in the armor from the judiciary in our work.
All right.
It's just a long paragraph. This is a female judge in Pennsylvania in a county. It's just a small court who is challenging the right of a corporation to keep a settlement agreement secret with a family that had been harmed by fracking. She says, so this is the beginning of judges acknowledging that corporations shouldn't have constitutional rights. This is the only one of its kind so far in the country since our movement started. There are no men or women defendants in this case. They are various business entities. They're all legal fictions, existing not by natural birth, but by operations of state statute. Such business entities cannot have been born equally free and independent because they were not born at all. Indeed, the framers of our Constitution could not have intended them to be free and independent because as creatures of the law, they're always subservient to it. In the absence of state law, business entities are nothing. In other words, they don't exist in the absence of state law. Once created, they become property of the men and women who own them, and therefore the constitutional rights that business entities may assert are not coterminous or homogeneous with the rights of human beings. They cannot be let alone by government. This is the best part, because businesses are but grapes, ripe upon the vine of the law, that the people of the Commonwealth raise, tend, and prune at their pleasure and need. Businesses are but grapes, ripe upon the vine of the law, that the people of this Commonwealth raise, tend, and prune at their pleasure and need. In other words, businesses exist at our pleasure and at our need, and we define them and we design them. They are our subordinates. Mm-hmm. This is the this is the crack in the beginning of the crack, mm-hmm. right? That will become a bigger and bigger crack as our movement proceeds over the next decades. Mm-hmm. And judges start to actually concede that corporations should not have more rights than we do.
The vision I get is that crack, and water gets into it and it freezes
exactly.
and it cracks
and
open.
It just
we got a call, I believe. First
we
caller, you're on the air.
Hello. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet. You got a question or comment?
Thanks for taking my call. Justice Douglas said that we can have democracy or concentration of wealth. We can't have both.
Yes.
Now, I'm wondering whether reality and contradictions can actually force a system change. Now, TransCanada, which happens to be a donor to the Clinton Foundation, is suing the government, our government, for $15 billion for stopping the Keystone XL. Now, that's quite a contradiction. The other
Can I just stop you for a sec? Can I stop you? Can I stop you for a sec? Are you talking about the
$76 billion of profits in the Cayman Islands, which is a tax haven, and that really is a form of theft. Whenever you see a bridge going down or a school going down, you can thank the tax havens.
Are you talking about the global trade treaties that have made this legal, or are you talking about U.S. federal law?
Yes, the global trade agreements, the TPP and the
yes.
TTIP and the TISA upend democracy and the constitutional state. Their awards are given in hotel rooms. The public is excluded, and the decisions cannot be appealed.
They can be by...
We're 600 corporate representatives
well, again,
who read and discussed the agreement. No one else, no parliamentarians in Europe, no congressmen. The parliamentarians couldn't take any notes.
So they
couldn't discuss, otherwise they would be subject to a jail sentence.
You sound pretty hopeless about this. Do you know that there actually is something that we the people can do if we step outside? Hello?
I think the TTIP is breaking down of its own irrationality. I think the French President Holland has spoken out against it, and I think many countries
he's not listening.
Realize that giving foreign investors special rights.
Are you interested in a solution, or are you just interested in how horrible the situation is? Because I'm suggesting solutions on this show.
Right. Well, I'm a Kierkegaardian. Truth can upend us, and truth is often indirect and can shame us.
Well, were you
an indirect power?
Did you hear the earlier part of the show?
Yes, and,
okay.
And I'm very
so
impressed. I'm very impressed by your work.
So can I just explain that in the same way that we the people can refuse to abide by illegitimate and unjust decision making from our subordinate judiciary, we the people can do exactly the same thing from this illegitimate structure of law called the WTO, the TPP, TIP, whatever, where decisions are made by an unaccountable tribunal of corporate attorneys that are supposedly overruling us. And the way that we're dealing with that in the community rights movement, and I don't think any other movement in the country is successfully taking on these global trade treaties so far, is that we're in the local ordinances and increasingly in our state constitutional amendments that we're writing and will ultimately be passing across the country, we strip these global trade treaties of their authority over us. We nullify their authority within the lawmaking that we're passing. And then, again, you need direct citizen enforcement at the local level because our elected officials are going to be too spineless. They're going to say, oh, the TPP overrules local government, and we're going to say, no, it doesn't.
And we can't afford the lawsuit.
We, the people, are the sovereign, and we will directly enforce the nullification of these corporate trade treaties within our city, town, or county. And that's what we're already doing. This language exists in many of our newer local ordinances.
Thank you for your passion, and I'm entirely in support.
And I would encourage you to find out more about this through my website, which I hope has been flashed on the screen a number of times, paulcienfuegos.com, but might be more directly relevant to you is the other website, communityrightspdx.org/podcast. I do a weekly commentary on community versus corporate rights on the KBOO Evening News every Tuesday evening. It plays around 5:30 or 5:40 in the evening every Tuesday. And if you go to that website that's currently on the screen, the bottom line, you can find my entire archive, both in text and audio form, going back 2 years of weekly commentary. And most of them are pretty timeless. Each one is a micro-educational commentary in itself.
I would recommend the website alternativetrademandate.org.
And that's fine, but they're not directly challenging the authority of the trade treaties. They're looking for alternatives to the trade treaties.
You'll learn what 50 NGOs in Europe have presented
Yes.
in order to defend labor and the environment.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we have to actually nullify the trade treaties' authority over us if we're going to win.
Caller, I appreciate the call and the comments.
Thank you very much.
That really kind of sparked the last part of the show here. But we have to move along. We got less than 2 minutes here, and not enough time for another call. But boy, I don't know where to take it. Now, that was a good call.
That was great.
Because I'm really more concerned, I think, about these global free trades because they're going to hamstring and colonize the planet to an nth degree.
If we allow it.
If we allow it. That's what I mean. It's what they're aiming to do.
That's
they're
right.
pretty much tying a bow on the colonization.
If we're not paying attention. If we
Whether or not
continue
it passes.
If we continue to do activism, which is pleading with corporate and government authorities to please cause less harm, it's from Oliver. Please, sir, can I have some more? If that's the relationship we have with corporate leaders and the people that we elect into government and with the people we didn't elect in these regulatory agencies, we're screwed. We're screwed. We have to get outside of that structure of law and start exercising our inherent self-governing authority. And anything short of that, we're screwed at this point. We're in an emergency situation.
We are. Even if you want to just consider the environment and the planet,
Yeah.
we're in an emergency situation, let alone the emergency situation that's coming down with democracy. Because like I've said before, and we don't have no time to get into it, it's either going to be the democracy rules the planet or corporations rule the planet. It's World War III in my mind.
And I don't see, frankly, I see no other social movement in the United States today that's challenging corporate rule more effectively than the community rights movement. So,
and that's the name of the movement.
That's the movement.
Community rights movement.
Yes.
And if folks want to just Google that, you can probably come up with what you're doing, but also what other people are doing.
Absolutely.
All
200 communities in 9 states.
All right. Well, we're down to 13 seconds here. I want to thank the crew. We got some new robotic cameras, and we had a great guest tonight. Next week we're going to have Dan Meek, and we'll continue from then. Thanks for tuning in.